Okay.
Here we are. You are live.
And it's Charlotte and Jessica here.
Right.
We are at Aragon Wine Market in Pensacola, Florida. Once again, we have the broadcasting from our lovely city. We are still in the middle of hurricane cleanup, but and we, I actually bought a generator this week because we had the other hurricane that was coming toward us, and I was like, holy moly, if we have another one, I just can't. I think everybody collectively said, I just can't. And so, unfortunately for the people over in Louisiana, they just can't either, but I think they're going to have to, which kind of sucks. But, it's always somebody, it's always something. And so luckily, we have been, I'm going to knock wood as I say this, spared, because we hope so. But anyway.
I know, right? We got to knock on wood on that one. It's early. It could do a lot of things.
Well, here's the deal. I feel like I got a generator. I got all my hurricane snacks in. I got all my supplies. So, as soon as you're prepared, it's going to be fine. So.
When we don't prepare,
like last time. Just kidding. Don't even start with that. A lot of people in Pensacola are not very happy with them because they left their barges out for free reign during this last hurricane, knocked out our bridge. So I tell this for the people not in Pensacola because there's a lot of people that watch that aren't aware.
That's right.
Although I think it probably it was all over the news. I mean, my gosh.
It was international, or not international, but nationally. I think it was on the news.
Yeah, because it was pretty.
Well, what's new with the shop?
So it's October.
Yes.
It's hurricane month.
It's Halloween month, but yes, it's hurricane month.
It's Halloween month, my favorite time of the year. Hi, Marcello. Hi. Hello.
Yes.
So we love Halloween around here. We are definitely going to be celebrating. We may have a few special scary wines in. But we definitely will be dressing up several times this month. So get your costume ready. Annie says feels like hurricane month for sure.
It does.
But Halloween, what are you going to do for Halloween?
On Halloween night, I am going to go over, of course, my bestie is over in Destin, and she's got her girls. And so Miss Evelyn is going to be Fancy Nancy. At this point in time, maybe, I don't know, it could change,
That's so cute.
And I know her girls are going to be Maleficent and Carmen Sandiego, so it's like, so girl power.
Yeah,
we're going to do a big tour over at her neighborhood, which is in kind of Main Street, Destin, and so that'll be a lot of fun. So adulting with the kiddos.
This was the year 2020 was our year. Halloween was on a Saturday night. And it was the time change, so we get an extra hour for Halloween. So it's kind of like,
it was like the literal time warp.
This was it. This was our year. So I still don't know what I'm going to do. Of course, I'll have numerous costume changes on deck. I've already got a couple planned. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, my Halloween celebration will be with you on the 29th as an adult.
So I hope everybody will tune in for that show. We are going to do a special Halloween show, and it's going to probably be spooky. Also, I have to remind everybody that the holidays are coming up, other than Halloween, which is my holiday. We have Thanksgiving and some of the other Christmassy holidays and.
Merry Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa. That's right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's
absolutely
perfect.
Okay. Whatever your holiday, we'll celebrate it with you and support it. So
exactly.
We got a basket for you.
And we have a basket for you as well as a holiday box for you. So we're going to have 2 holiday boxes coming out. We have one for Halloween. One for Thanksgiving, which Jess and I are working on right as we speak. Mm-hmm. Make sure you get that, and it's going to have a little bit of something for everyone that comes to your holiday table. And then we'll do 1 or 2 at Christmas. We're not sure yet. So that should be fun as well. So make sure you get those in. We also are taking reservations. We have decided to open the store up. We are a venue. We have done many parties in the past, but we kind of cut that back this year just due to coronavirus concerns. But we are going to open the store back up to small parties. Jessica is an event planner. If you don't know that already, you really should. And she's a great job at it. So if you have a party here, you're getting her without having to pay her prices, right?
That's what they say. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a beautiful space and such a great opportunity, especially with the courtyard, to do any number of different style events. Whether it's a personal event, a small bridal shower, baby shower, any kind of intimate event of that nature, as well as corporate and executive, events, small meetings.
Yeah.
And then private wine tastings, like how amazing would it be? It's like, what do I want to do for my birthday? Well, I want to get together with 6 of my besties and do a private wine tasting with someone that is knowledgeable, and do a course of wines and flight through some beautiful selections. So there's lots of opportunities.
And there's a ton of stuff that you can do here. I see Annie says that she needs to talk to you about booking. So, but also if you are interested in doing private events other places, feel free to reach out to Jessica here at the store.
Thank you.
She can come to your house. I know you've done several weddings this year, despite a lot of people canceling events. You still have had safely done events, even though we're dealing with that. So.
Yeah, you just navigate the waters and within the confines of the restrictions that were current. But now we're open for business. We're ready to go. And my sweet couple this weekend, just shout out to them, Letty and Jesse. Their wedding in Orange Beach, unfortunately, because of the closures, got canceled. But we're going to do a beautiful wedding at their family's property anyway.
That's
so
nice. Yeah,
just keep moving
Everybody's
forward.
just trying to do what they can. So, and I see Carol Morrill says, "Great to see you." It's great
Hello.
to see you, Carol Moore. And
Hi Sylvia. Oh my gosh, that was like my best friend's mom growing up when I was a kid. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for joining us. We have
a huge show tonight.
special show
We're
tonight.
excited and rambling because we're so excited.
It's our nervous. It's nervous energy.
I've never seen you nervous, and I've seen it now. You don't look that fast normally. It's like,
well, because it's Ron Edwards. He is a master sommelier, which is huge. There's only, I think, 236 of those in the world.
In the entire world.
Not just in the United States. And he is, he can probably tell you what number he is, but he is 127, I think. He is a master sommelier, and so that's super impressive. I have questions for him. I hope that you guys will please have some questions for him as well, because this is an opportunity that you just really should take advantage of. So without further ado, we'll bring in Ron, and we'll bring in Métis Fix from Winebow. Hi, Ron.
Hey, how are you?
Great.
Good day.
Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
So I'm super thrilled to be here because I get to talk about 2 of my favorite wines, and I get to meet both of you.
Yes, thank you so much.
And on top of that, I get to make Marcello listen to me.
You see that Marcello is such a nice guy. He joined us one time, and I'm sure he will be happy to listen to you, as we all will.
Are you saying that you have to talk over an Italian? Is that what you're trying to say, Ron? Is that what you're angling towards right now?
I just have to use more hand motions.
So, Ron, I was reading a little bit about your background, and I noticed one of the things was that you were in engineering.
I was. I find
that interesting because I think that engineers are people that are very good at that, have a very particular personality and a very methodical way about thinking of life and things. And I'm just curious as to whether or not that kind of background and that kind of thinking has helped you in the wine business and in your tasting of the wines and becoming a master somm.
I'm sure that the training of having to, memorize that level of discrete facts didn't hurt. But I'm not one of those people who was a good engineer. I'm not an engineer. I'm not quite introverted enough, although I am still an introvert, and I'm not quite interested in, at that point in my life, to the number of hours in the study lounge required to get A's in engineering. So while I did graduate and I did pass the engineering training exam, I never took a job in the industry because by that point I had already fallen in love with hospitality, which my mother would have said, I don't know why. My mother actually told me, why were you in engineering school anyway? You're not an engineer. I said, seemed like a good idea at the time.
Right.
But I grew up in a missionary's house, and so this whole idea of serving others was just part of everyday life, and so I guess that's what really locked me into hospitality. And it's still one of my favorite things in the world is to work a dining room on a busy Saturday night and turn the light bulb on at table after table after table of people just like changing that moment in time for them by getting just the right beverage on the table or solving a problem for them that they didn't think was all that big a deal, but maybe now it's just such a much better experience. And so I missed that. Not enough to give up weekends and nights and holidays for the rest of
Right.
I still miss it. I like to dabble. I like to go in and, what I call rock starring, work for a few hours and then out.
Yeah. That's nice. Keeps the passion going. And you get to see your family because I saw also that you have 5 daughters.
Yes. One wife, 5 daughters.
That makes a good man.
It has made me a better man, that's for sure. I'm not sure where I started, but I'm better than I was. Certainly more understanding.
That's pretty neat. Well, I do have a couple more questions for you, just because I find what you do so interesting. I know we've probably all seen I guess it's on Netflix, the documentary about becoming a som and what you go through as far as studying. And is that reality? Is that what it really looks like? Do you study? Do you make these connections with other SOMs and y'all go through this together? And what is that like?
I think the best way to look at the movie SOM is that was a caricature, not necessarily an actual documentary.
Right.
For people's journey through this. And everybody has a different journey. And yes, they did it together. And they had that camaraderie, and they were their tasting group, and the whole idea. When I was studying to become a master sommelier, I was in Michigan. There was one master sommelier in Michigan that could be a mentor. I certainly accessed Madeleine Trufant as often as I could, but I was a young father, a full-time employee managing a restaurant, and there just isn't that many hours. And so my journey was completely different because I figured out pretty early that pursuit had to fit into everything else, or it wasn't possible. I couldn't really make that the only thing in my life, which I think was a very positive scenario because it kept me from putting an undue amount of importance on it. Not that I don't cherish my title, and I think it's an amazing. I look back at it now and sometimes I wonder how I actually did it. But it is, it helps to have a great partner in life who keeps you balanced. And then, it's like some days it's like, are you going to clean up the kitchen? And then the other days it's like, your exam's in 2 months. Are you going to study? So it's
nice. Yeah.
Both, so it worked out great.
That's really pretty neat. I like to hear that side of it because it does sound like a more balanced life that you lead as opposed to what you see in the.
And I think it's an accurate depiction of people's tenacity across the country, and I'm sure around the globe. When you want something and you're fascinated and passionate about something, you figure out when to make the time to do it. And like you said, and Charlotte and I were just talking about me being a young parent and working through college and still being passionate about what I, wanting to perform and do theater and these sort of things. And you figure it out and you make time for it. And it took you 9 years to finish.
9 years from the day I took the introductory course to the day I passed my final blind tasting in London in 2005.
Wow. So, yeah. And is that a typical timeline for people? I don't really know.
I don't know if there's a typical timeline. I have friends that did it in 5 years total. I have friends that did it in 12 years total. I have friends that passed the exam after 7 attempts. I have friends that
Yeah.
passed in the first attempt.
Sure.
What I often tell people is there are no master sommeliers who gave up,
You're right. That is, I love that.
and there are no master sommeliers who never failed.
Right.
Meaning they may have passed their first master sommelier exam, but almost all of them failed their advanced exam. So it's like, okay, at some point in the process, you have to deal with the obstacle. I did not get over the obstacle this time. What am I going to do about it? And so all of us have one continuing theme, and that is that we are highly motivated, often far too opinionated, and most certainly we tend to obsess over things. So I watched several friends pass the master sommelier exam, and then there was nothing else to concentrate on, so they picked up a second language or a third language, or they became yoga instructors, or they became musicians, or they, and it just went on because they needed something else to put that amount of energy into.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was like I passed and started a consulting business, which meant if I wasn't spending time with my family, I was trying to figure out how to make a living in the middle of nowhere in northern Michigan as at that point the third master sommelier in Michigan, because one had moved back from Vegas by then. But it was just like, I think I'll just do this because this is more than I can do anyway.
Right.
And that was 12 years worth. And then I came to wine.
Wow. Well, it's certainly been fascinating to me to get a real understanding. I was looking, doing some research and looking at your background and understanding the number of sommeliers in the entire world, and your count, your number 127. That's correct.
Yeah, I decided not to argue with the guy who passed the same day I did, and I just gave him 126 and said whatever.
There we go. Fair enough. I was fascinated. That is astounding to me. And I think there was the variance of number of in the United States versus the world was also drastically unbalanced I felt like there were so many more in the United States. It was so weighted here comparatively to the rest of the world. And that was very interesting to me as well.
Yeah, the organization started in England in 1969, and the view of the industry in Europe and the view of the industry in the United States has completely diverged over the course of time. And we have these conversations with our European chapter friends, and their conversations just come from a completely different source of thought about what a sommelier is there. They still view it as what it maybe should be, but it gets skewed on American soil, and I'll get into that in a second. But that is still the person over there who buys the wine, sells the wine, puts the wine away. The real, like, oh yeah, even if you're a master sommelier, you're still doing that job.
Right.
And so it's a very different view. It doesn't get quite as much airplay. It's a very service-driven thing. It's not about tooting your own horn and all that stuff. On American soil, you take this idea of achievement, right? Achieving excellence.
I was going to say it's an objective.
And you put it in the hands of the American populace, and all of a sudden they feel
so competitive,
right? I'm gonna win that gold medal. It's not that Europe's not competitive. They just view this pursuit very differently.
Yeah.
Even when I got into it, I viewed it as I sat in my introductory course, and Wayne Belding and Doug Frost and Barb Worley lectured on the world of wine. And this was so far back that they were using an overhead projector. That tells you how old I am. And I watched Wayne Belding drawing the geology of the Côte d'Or, the Kimmeridgian chain, upside down on an overlay machine while talking about Burgundy and why calcareous marl was so important. And then I heard Doug Frost talk about wine, and he's hands down the greatest beverage lecturer on the planet. And I said, I don't know what it's going to take, but I want to do that. I want to hang out with them. And so that's what it took for me. But
that's awesome.
As it progressed, it became this holy grail which also has its downsides, right? Because then people pursue it without balance. I don't critique anybody for their pursuit, but this is something that if you pursue it with balance, it's more rewarding than if you pursue it without balance. And that's why the U.S. is different. We just latch onto these things differently than the European mindset. And so our chapter is much larger. I guess in this country is becoming known. I mean, when I passed the Master Sommelier exam in 2005, I would tell people what I am, and they'd go, "What? What's that?" You know. At least now we've had a movie come out where some people know what that is.
Right. Well, and I always laugh when people ask me, like, "Oh, are you a sommelier now?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, no! I work at I'm just starting out in this journey. There's not even a comparison to that."
Well, it's such a change too, right? Because there's 22-year-olds who are becoming, I mean, some of them are certified, number one. Some of them are actually advanced at 22, 23 years old. That's incredible because theoretically in the United States, right, you can't drink till you're 21. We all know that's not the case, right? Right, guys? But
legally drink before you're 21.
Yeah. But if you grew up in an Italian-American household like this guy, you've had some wine in your life. But yeah, I mean, that's incredible to think about that, you know, somebody who's maybe 23 is an advanced sommelier. And that's just where the culture has grown. And even since, I guess, Somm came out in maybe 2009 or something, I guess it was somewhere around there.
A little after that, but somewhere.
Yeah, but still, it's still a very short time. I mean, considering, and then there's people who are, you know, considered the youngest master somms or the youngest somms. I mean, and they're 24, 25, 28 years old.
Yeah,
it's just the way it is. But if they're hospitalians, I think that makes a big difference. I think Ron would say, I think if there are people who care about hospitality, care about helping people, not even just at the table, but like Ron does, helping people learn about places and demystifying things, that makes a really big difference. You know, Ron's, you know, my favorite master somm. He's my Weinbo guy. I always look back in my quiver at people like Bobby Stuckey, who I'm sure that Ron knows very well, who's like a lifer in the restaurant business. Like I don't think Bobby Stuckey would ever leave the restaurant business. I hope that he never does. But he's that kind of person who's trying to bring the hospitality side of it to people as well. And that I think is crucial. That's what the heavy lifting is for a great sommelier is helping really in any way, regardless of which side it is. It's providing assistance and hospitality, even if it's learning or literally pouring a glass of wine.
Well, exactly. I actually, when Ron was talking about that, I was like, I could identify with that just here, even in the wine store. I mean, we're not at that level, of course, but I mean, I didn't realize opening the wine store, I was going to really find my niche of helping people. Mm-hmm. You know, people come in and I'm not selling them. I'm like helping them find what is it that they need. And it's been a lovely journey for me to understand that, was something that was missing in my life. And it's been awesome to be able to provide it through wine.
I think that would be the same connection for me in wedding planning and event design and event planning is that, I always say that I can't play every instrument in the orchestra, but I conduct the orchestra, and my role is to manage the guest experience and, to be able to observe a room and see someone either struggling with something, or you can automatically see the elder in the family that there's no way they're going to navigate the buffet line, and you send the server to them, and those nuances and just ability to oversee that service goes to the bottom line, because every little thing goes to the bottom line of a guest experience. So for us here at Aragon, I know that some of the guest experience things, having to park, not having curbside parking and different things like that are a struggle. And so, being able to absolve those concerns for guests has always been huge for me.
I think we're all helpers.
Yeah, helpers.
So Ron, would you like us to put in your presentation to the screen?
Sure.
Are you ready for that?
Yeah, totally ready. And I'm just going to follow up on that. And not every sommelier is at a point in their life or in their career who has figured out that it's really about the guest. But they do figure it out with time. I made mistakes myself. I want a really big wine list. I want this, I want that. And then in reality, you hire me when I was a consultant before I took the job for Winebo. If you said, hey, I want to build a great wine program, I'd say, okay, great. We are building a program that's 150 wines or less. And they were like, well, why? And I said, because that's all your staff can handle and your guests don't need more than that. It's overwhelming for people. They don't want to read the wine Bible to get to their favorite glass of wine. And so a lot of things have changed as I've gotten older, as I've learned more, seen more guests. But one thing hasn't changed, and that's the part of service that was, one, instilled in me as a child, and the other is that Madeleine Trufant would have nothing else. She is the embodiment of hospitality in human form. And having her as a mentor and as a sage to this day, I still call her with like, what would you do about this? We need people like that in our
100%.
I'm totally ready to talk about Pinot Noir and have
All right. Well, let's we'll put your presentation into the stream, and we'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, just in case they can't see me on screen, that's what I actually look like when I have a photographer and lighting and a suit, but not necessarily what I look like today. Right, so the title of this presentation is Pinot Noir Reversal, because as we think of Pinot Noir, we generally think of the Northern Hemisphere, we think of California, we think of Burgundy, we think of not Southern Hemisphere, but we need to think of Southern Hemisphere because those wines down there come in elegant, beautiful, worthy packages. A bit unknown perhaps, and I'm hoping that everybody who's listening and watching tonight has these wines in front of them, because you just can't take my word for it on these. These are so stunning that you have to experience them yourself. And so let's get started. I think this is like, what else do I need to say? Great wine's not a country. We have a history as wine consumers in the United States and Europe and other places that we associate wine with a very grand thing, French wine.
Right.
Isn't it funny though? We never say American wine unless it's a disparaging comment. We say maybe California, or we get it down to the state level and say Oregon. But for quite some time, we have allowed ourselves to say things like Australian wine and label an entire continent. So we're going to talk about that tonight, because that's completely unfair. That'd be like saying American wine, because it's the same size landmass. Just wrap your brain around that. Do we have great wine everywhere in this country? No, but we do have wine, right? So wine is not a country, and great varietals are not a country. Pinot Noir is not great in just one place. It can be great in a lot of places, and it's really dependent on many factors. So as we move into this short discussion about these two wines, keep that forefront in your mind as you go to a retail shop, as you go to Aragon, and you're thinking about, well, I want this, meaning grape varietal or style. Open the doors, because that grape varietals and style probably exist in 5 or 6 places you never considered, which might be on the shelf. And if not on the shelf, they're certainly available somewhere, and it's well worth the exploration. The greatest joy of being in the wine industry and having gone through what I've done to get where I am is the unfair amount of wine I've tasted from all over the world, and which gives me a perspective on things that isn't possible for the normal wine drinker who lives on Smith Street and the white picket fence and all that stuff. That's just not the world you live in. But so trust me to tell you, having wandered the globe and tasted a lot of it, there's so much good wine out there. Don't pigeonhole yourself into a single country or a single grape variety or a single subregion. All right, so first things first. Pinot Noir is a pain, a fickle, difficult plant in the vineyard, which is why it is coddled and loved and desired, and people call it the Holy Grail when they find the great ones, and why the Burgundians have been working with it for 800 years and still haven't mastered it. So why? Well, it has a little bit of amphilography, a little bit of grape stuff. It has really thin skins, which means it doesn't protect itself very well. It has really tight bunches. So when you see the berries, they're really close together, which doesn't give them airspace, which means that they're susceptible to mildew and rot. I was so sad for a friend of mine. I've been working with him now for over 5 years. He has a little bitty 1.5 acre plot in northern Michigan, and he wanted to make a great red wine off his property. And I talked to him about it for a while, and I said, that's never going to happen. And we talked some more, and then I shared some good champagne with him and his wife, and then I shared another bottle of good champagne with his wife, and then we're like, now that you've had this, what we really should be doing here is making champagne style wines on your property. And he's like, I'm in. Donnelly really likes this, so let's make that. And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. So we planted Pinot Noir and Chardonnay alongside some other things. And this year, Pinot lived up to its marker. It was completely eaten up with powdery mildew, and they lost the whole crop. Just a bummer. Pinot Noir is a difficult master. And the other problem is it's this grape that wants to ripen really fast and bud out too early. So it's susceptible to early frost. And then if it gets very warm, it wants to be ripe too early and there's no flavor. So you need that long, even tempered, stretched out, never gets too warm, never gets too cold sort of environment in which to grow it. Burgundy. But that's not the only place. The other really interesting thing is that when you ferment Pinot Noir, no matter how tart you harvest it, it drops acidity during fermentation. So there's also this, like, okay, so I have to get long ripening period so that I'm ripe, but I'm still tart, because it's going to get less tart throughout the fermentation process. I was shocked one day when a northern Michigan winery told me they acidify their Pinot Noir before they make it. And I'm like, wait a minute. On the 45th parallel in a semi-continental lake environment thing, it gets down, it's cold here. What are you talking about? You acidify. He's like, well, it drops acidity like crazy during fermentation. I'm like, nice to know. See, that you always ask the questions, right? The most important thing in life is not knowing stuff, it's knowing how to ask questions, and then you get that thing. So when you take all these first things first, you start to understand why sitting in front of a great glass of Pinot Noir can feel like you found the Holy Grail, because it's such a difficult grape to get to that point. So have respect for the above average glass, because they also overcame amazing odds to get a great glass of Pinot Noir. It is nothing like Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Sauvignon can be grown almost anywhere and make a decent wine out of it. Pinot Noir, not so much. So now let's talk about proper expectations, because if you are going to experience or dig into the idea of a wine, one of the things that happens to us is we have a sip of something thinking it's going to be one way, and then it's something else. And when that happens, we're disappointed, and therefore we don't like it. Perfect example, you're going out to dinner, you have your heart set on a steak, the server's a really great salesperson and talks you into the halibut dish. It's this beautiful pan-seared halibut with truffle with potatoes, and you're like, yeah, that sounds really good. And you have a few bites of your halibut, and the server comes over, and how is it? You're like, it's good. It's actually fabulous, but you wanted steak, so it's only good. So we need expectations when we talk about grape varieties, and sometimes you need to lean on somebody else. So just a by the by, this is a picture from my trip to Tasmania. This is in the Dalrymple vineyard, in a vineyard that you can actually see Bass Strait, and you can feel the cold air off the ocean, and this was just before harvest in 2019. So Pinot Noir is going to reflect the location. If you plant it in a really warm area, it's going to be big, fruity, unbalanced, where the acidity doesn't balance out the alcohol, that sort of thing. But you plant it in a really cold location, it's going to be thin and hard to deal with. So Pinot Noir and the grape providers of this grape have a cooling influence over their growing season, or they are not the grape providers of this grape. So that's really important to realize that, wow, if I'm going to get great Pinot Noir, something has to cool off the summertime. It can be maritime, right? So a great example of that would be Sonoma Coast. They're now growing Pinot Noir on the other side of the mountain, where it can actually see the ocean, and that's a completely different environment than Napa Valley. Altitude, a great example of that would be Argentina, where we're seeing Pinot Noir being grown at 6,000 feet of elevation. Another example of that we're going to talk about in Adelaide Hills. Latitude, so like Germany, or the like, where you move latitude lines away from the equator so that you get longer daytime hours in the summer, but lower temperatures. That's also what we're going to deal with in Central Otago, which is where one of these wines is from. So, final product, a thin-skinned grape should be deft, elegant, and refreshing, not powerful, not aggressive. It can be textured, but it shouldn't be velvety. Even the great wines of Domaine Romanée-Conti are deft, elegant. They have a refreshing side. And they are not, while they have power, they are not powerful. They are red fruit driven. Thin-skinned varieties like Pinot Noir should taste like red berries. That's their fruit drive. Tartans most of the time. They should have powdery tannins. Tannins you can feel, that light bitterness that affects you when you taste wine, that dries your mouth out. They should have that, but it should be very powdery and very much overweighed by the acidity and the fruit. And last but not least, texture. And one of the things that is so attractive about Pinot Noir in general is its texture, because it goes from silk to satin. And if you can imagine rubbing those fabrics against the back of your hand, that's sort of the effect that great Pinot Noir has in the mouth. So now we know what to expect. So I just made you, everyone who's listening and watching, I just made you your own arbiter of quality for Pinot Noir, because if it fits these categories, it's probably really good Pinot Noir. And if it doesn't, it might be a good glass of wine, but maybe it's not great Pinot Noir.
That was a great description too.
That was wonderful.
Yeah, I like that.
Now we move to Star Wars, the Clone Wars. I'm sure there are plenty of people on this webinar who are of my generation and therefore totally know what the Clone Wars are. When you talk about Pinot Noir, you'll hear people in the industry throw out these clone names like Dijon clones and Pommard clones, and it's so confusing. And I wish we wouldn't do it, but since we do it, I'm going to give you just a little hint of what they're talking about. Pinot Noir has been around for over 1,000 years as a domesticated vine, and because of that, there are lots and lots and lots. We're talking about well over 800 clonal selections of this one single variety. It's still Pinot Noir, but it's a slight variant, right? It's like driving down the road in corn country, and there's the experimental plots of seed company like the Cobb 112 and then 217, and all of it's corn, but it's slight genetic variations. And so these vine cuttings that were harbored and propagated by certain places get sort of lumped into categories. The most prolific of the clonal selections come from Burgundy. Imagine that's where it started. And they are divided between the Dijon clones, propagated in the Dijon nursery, and then the Pommard clones, which were actually pulled out of Chateau de Pommard and then propagated from there in the 1940s. And there's a lot of Pommard in Oregon now. There's a lot of Dijon clone in everywhere. And then there's this clone that you'll find sometimes called Wädenswil, which is actually from Switzerland. And that's grown a lot in Oregon and in other places. It really does well with cold hardiness, and it comes across in that really tart red fruit. There are the Jackson clones, not the Jackson we think of now. This is the 1889 Foothill Experimentation Station in Jackson of Amador County, California. So we have an entire group of clones that were isolated in 1889 in California that are now available in virus-free versions through the help of modern nurseries. Martini clones, not because you can have a great gin martini with them, but they are taken from the Joseph Swan Russian River Estate, which is, if you, by the way, just a side note, if you never had a bottle of Joseph Swan Russian River Pinot with about 8 years of bottle age, go find one. Amazing.
Winebo doesn't sell that wine in Florida.
Sorry about that.
Just kidding. No. Joseph Swan is terrific stuff, and Joseph Swan came from a family of teetotalers, which some of the best wine people come from, incidentally.
Yeah. So that was, and honestly, the Martini clones are probably actually DRC, Domaine Romanée-Conti cuttings from Vosne Romanée that were brought over in a suitcase and then propagated before they knew what they were endangering. And then,
yeah, I think that brings me to the question of, I mean, we know what the clone means, but I mean, just the very basic, how do people use clones and how, and tell us about that real quick.
Yeah, so all of these clones, and I just want to mention one more because it's going to be relevant here in just a minute, and that's the Mother Vine 6 clone, which is the most popular clone in Australia, and it came from Clos Vougeot in 1831 to Australia. So, Australia is not that new a wine country. All right, so let's go how to use clones. Each one of these clones, including the subdivisions like the Dijon clone 7 and then this and this and this, and they all have numbers and stuff.
Yeah.
Each one offers you a slightly different vegetative property, or it's this one's a little more drought resistant, and this clone is a little bit more fruit forward, and this one's a little more tannic, and this one buds a little later, and this one buds a little earlier, and all of them have their own little both viticultural characteristics as well as in-product flavor characteristics. And so the ideal in today's world, what most people do in a vineyard is they plant a large variety of clones if they have the option, so that they are hedging their bets against what nature might provide them. And actually right now, what's going on in the motherland of Burgundy is they are doing tons and tons of research to come up with drought and heat resistant clones of Pinot Noir to plant now to hedge against global warming and the droughts that might come in the future. So that's what it's all about. You as an end consumer, you just need to know they exist. And when somebody starts talking about clones, know that that's sort of like using seasoning and cooking. Each one of these clones brings its own little character, like, okay, well, I'm going to grab some pepper, I'm going to grab some salt, I'm going to grab a little thyme, I'm going to put some lemon juice in there, and then all of a sudden they have sauce, right? So
that's a great analogy.
Yeah. And I think we could do an entire episode on focusing
Cooking
on
with clones.
cooking with clones, but then also global warming, because it's the one I think Trey uses in every single one of our virtual tastings.
I think it shows that a winemaker or a vineyard manager is working really hard to really find the right set of clones or the right fruit or they're just really working hard when they're identifying specific clones. Mm-hmm. They're really doing the extra work that a lot of larger, maybe vineyard operations or winemaking operations are not willing to do, because that takes a lot of hands-on work, not just in the vineyard, but also like literally through like a microscope or through testing. And that all costs a little bit more money for sure because of man hours, but it just means that somebody is working that much harder to bring you a bottle of wine that can be the best that it could possibly be.
Yep. So why don't we move to, before it's too late and everybody dies of thirst, because I've been talking about really want to sip wine. So let's talk about Central Otago. So we're moving our perspective south of the equator, and we're moving way to the other hemisphere, and we're moving to New Zealand. Probably, I mean, if you think about wine places to try to get to, it's certainly the most remote. So far from everywhere, right? You think of it being close to Australia, but it's a 4-hour flight from Australia to New Zealand. It is not a short little haul. And so it's divided into 2 islands. Most people know that part. The northern island ranges everything from sort of subtropical up in the north to temperate at the south. But we're in the south end of the southern island, and the place called Otago, Central Otago, and it is tucked up into the mountains, as you can see in these pictures. Each of these pictures are pictures of 2 paddocks vineyards. And so
beautiful.
Yeah. The one in your top right is the original paddock. And so it's tucked up into the mountains at 400 meters of elevation. It's got, look at the snow-capped peaks behind it while you're still in full leaf as it's growing. This is an area that's tenuous. And then you go around from here, and each one of these vineyards is a little different. Going sort of clockwise down, the area on the bottom right is over in next to Felton Road. If you've ever heard of them, it's in Bannockburn. The one on the top left is called Last Chance Vineyard, and is probably the southernmost vineyard in the whole world, meaning getting further and further away from the equator. And then the building you see there is their guest reception area, and that's their latest property. And in that property, they actually have bought a farm, and it's a full organic farm with animals and herbs, and they sell their lavender extracts and stuff like that. So this is a great picture of what you're expecting. It's rugged land. In a lot of ways, it looks a little bit like Northern California with its arid nature, because it has that rain shadow, all that weather coming from west to east that hits New Zealand is blocked by those mountains you see. That's the Southern Alps, where you can ski year round on the glaciers. So they're tall, 10,000 feet.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So that means it's dry on the other side, which is very good for vineyards, right? They don't want a lot of water. They need enough to survive. What's most important about Otago is that cooling influence. There are many places in Otago that you cannot plant grapes because they just will not ripen. And then you go 400 or 500 feet around the edge of the hill or whatever, and 400 or 500 yards or meters around the hill, and you get a different exposure, and now you can plant a vineyard. It's really that specific, which is what Pinot Noir loves. A grape that is that finicky wants the person who picks the vineyard to be that picky too. All of this soil, the great soil of Pinot Noir is supposed to be calcareous based from Burgundy. Not true. It works great in volcanic soils as well. The majority of the soils here in central Otago are based on some degradation of schist, which is a metamorphic soil that you find in great places like York. All right, so let's see here. Latitude, 45 south. So that's the same latitude as Bordeaux. It's the same latitude as northern Michigan. And I believe it's the same latitude as like Vancouver Island.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So you're fairly far south. And because there's no other continents, if you think about the roaring 40s, as they're called, that southern ocean that's below New Zealand, below southern Australia, there is no land in the way from the Tierra del Fuego in South America until you get to Australia. And then it's not really in the way because it's kind of above the roaring 40s. So you have all of that cold ocean just rampaging through the world all the time with nothing to block it. It's an amazing weather center. And all of that cold air gets funneled up towards New Zealand and makes this area quite temperate. The average daily temperature during the growing season in central Otago is like about 59, 60 degrees. It gets warmer than that, but that's the average through the growing season. Okay? So that's a little bit of the story. What really makes this interesting is the air is so pure here that they have extra radiation ability into the grapevines. So the skins and the grapes get riper faster than they would at that temperature because they're getting no interference from pollution. And of course, there's the drop in the ozone layer helping that out as well. They get 11% more solar radiation than a grape growing at northern latitude of 50 degrees.
That is really interesting.
Wow, yeah.
Didn't know that until today. I was like, that's a cool fact. I got it.
That is a cool
That
fact.
is a great fact.
All right, so hopefully everybody has their bottle, but if they don't,
Yes.
like that.
Hopefully everybody hasn't drank theirs like me.
You can always pour some more, right?
That is true.
So let's talk about Two Pinots. This is sort of the flagship wine for them. They do make some single vineyards, which Michael and I talked about. If they come available in Florida, because we literally get ones of cases of these for the nation, like 5-10 cases, to give you guys a shout. Because to be quite honest, I had the Sommelier, which is that vineyard in Bannockburn, about 3-4 Fridays ago, and I just came back to it in awe. Every 15 minutes, I would just be dumbstruck with how fabulous this wine was, and I was like, I was so sad because next time I tried to order it, it was gone. All right, so these are all organically grown. If that is something you pay attention to,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of people do.
And we actually have a couple of questions that we're holding for right now until the end of the presentation. So we're definitely going to answer all of those for our viewers that are watching.
Yeah. Keep asking questions. We'll get to them all at the end.
Cool. So this wine that you're tasting is a blend of all the properties. It's a barrel selection that they make from the various properties. Some go into single vineyards, some go into this, because this is the largest production they have too. So they definitely need this wine to be a little bit of volume for a tiny winery. 25% of this wine is fermented with the whole cluster. And the reason they do that is for aromatics and also to add just a smidge of tannin from the stems. It makes it a little different than it would be if they crush it all. This is an argument that will happen forever with Pinot Noir producers. Some people are completely for it. Some people are completely against it. Some people are in the middle. But it's never neutral in the conversation with the winemaker when you say, do you whole cluster ferment your Pinot Noir? Just expect a very direct and all right. They use French barrels, which if you can imagine what it costs, well, I'll just tell you, a good French oak barrel is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,100 or $1,200 in this country, and we didn't have to ship it to New Zealand. So I'm sure there's a premium on that. So keep that in mind as when you ask yourself, why does this wine cost what it costs? $1,200 for a barrel.
I think that's a very good point to speak to the expense of the barrels, and then certainly the expense on, the older they are and the quality of them and how it could vary and affecting the price of the wine overall.
And then you throw on top of that, the cost of Pinot Noir is driven by the meticulous nature that is required to grow Pinot Noir and ferment Pinot Noir. It is the most hands-on required grape variety that if you want to make quality out of it, you have to treat it like your own personal rose garden. Everywhere they do this, that's the way it works. All right, so I'm going to throw some science at you. Maybe there's a chemist on the webinar, but I just want you to log this away as you taste things, because our body actually reacts to pH, which is the chemical concept of tartness versus alkaline, right? So great Pinot Noir tends to have a lower pH, a little bit more tartness, right? And this one has 3.6. So what does that mean to you? Well, it means it's going to taste about the same tartness level as a wine from Pommard in Burgundy. It has 13% alcohol by volume, which for a New World Pinot Noir, go pick them up off the shelf, turn them over, Carneros, Russian River, Santa Barbara, and you're going to have a hard time anymore finding one under 14.
Yeah.
Good, bad, indifferent, it just doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is that this wine has had that opportunity I talked about at the very beginning. Long, slow, even-tempered ripening to get them to a point where they have what I believe is a fabulously balanced wine. So let me address the wine, because most of the time people go, what do you find in the wine? It's really more about what you find, but I'll give you some clues. So cola nut is so prominent in this wine. It's like, imagine cherry cola without the sugar. Red cherries and black cherries, pomegranate extract and fresh pomegranate, crushed raspberries, vanilla extract, clove. Those are both from the barrel.
So I want to just
and thyme on the stem, like fresh thyme that you're about to put in the sauce.
I want to ask you while you're doing that, because that's such a master somm thing to do. Like, how do you do that? I mean, like, how do those things just come to you? Because it doesn't take. I mean, is that just practice?
A little bit of imagination, a whole lot of practice, and a whole lot of tasting with other people and listening to what you find in the wine, and then going back. I laugh so much. It's such a joy, and it keeps me in memory of people who are just starting off on their wine journey. I look at my first wine journal when I was in college, and I discovered Pinot Noir was the first wine I ever liked. And I took fastidious notes because I heard that's what you were supposed to do if you're a wine geek. And I go back and look at them once in a while, and it's every wine I picked up was cherry. That was the only fruit. cherry, which isn't exactly delineating wines, but it was the beginning point of figuring out what to say. And so don't be dismayed or intimidated or frustrated when you hear me pull out what I pull out and you pull out one or two things, because I have done nothing but analyze wine since about 1998.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Absolutely.
10,000 hours of hard practice in. So I'm going to have access to some information that might not come to you right away. Instead, take what I've said and try and go find those things, because sometimes it's the power of suggestion to turn the light bulb in your head. You know what we should do? We should host one of these where I do the demystifying wine, and we get 4 bottles in front of each of your customers, and we walk through them to help them find the main componentry and figure out how to taste wine.
Yeah.
Right.
That was honestly my question. How does someone begin the journey of not being a sommelier, but like begin the journey of wine tasting from the approach of, I want to be a sponge. I want to absorb everything I can. And when I taste and when I smell and when I go to absorb these wines, sometimes I find myself kind of stuck in this, like as far as my brain will go. And it's like, how do I get into this and approach it from an objective, point of view?
I like your idea. I mean,
Yeah.
I would suggest to Mike Fix
Let's
put that on the
schedule
schedule because that was one of my questions for later was, what are your tips on blind tasting? We're doing a blind tasting here at the store, and just like I want to delve into more of your brain now.
So the answer to that is it's not as simple an equation as, well, I'll just tell you to find this and you'll find it. The best case scenario is tasting with people who have more experience than you, asking them to verbalize what they find, and then seeing if you can locate it as well. But here's the method. The method is that your brain works in macro and wine description is in micro. So Jessica, when you think about dance and you're about to do something and you're going to perform, right? That performance we see in macro, and your brain does it in micro. Every tiny increment happens in the way your brain tells you to do it, one increment at a time. And on the outside, we see it as one flowing, elegant movement.
Yeah,
you're so correct.
You are spot on right there. I love that. I love that.
That's a great analogy
Yeah.
and something that I can definitely understand, because the fundamentals and the backbone of the movement has such weight and validity into the quality of the movement.
Right.
And I think that directly, just saying it out loud directly applies to the backbone of a wine.
Mm-hmm. So what we have to do is
quality of it has, it's amazing how it's applicable. But yes, certainly.
So what we have to do is we have to reverse it. We have to play sort of a memory game. And instead of thinking, because if you just stick your nose in a glass of wine, you'll be lucky if you come up with red or white, but you'll definitely come up with wine. Hopefully, that's about it, right? But if you go the other direction and you ask yourself the questions like, if you walk into a house and somebody's baking an apple pie, your brain just spits out, apple pie, delicious, right? But what gave you that information is the smell of cinnamon or clove and that undescribable smell of baking buttery crust and the smell of apple. And all these components came together to give your brain the information that then it spit out as one item. So we have to reverse that process in wine, and we have to ask ourselves, is there lemon here? Is there apple here? What kind of apple? Is there orchard pitted fruit like peaches and stuff? Yes, maybe, I don't know. Which one? You have to decide. You force your brain to look for things.
But I'm
then you come up with
curious of that process, the process that you go through to do that. That's what I would like to do, maybe another presentation on at some point.
Well, that is actually the entire instruction of demystifying wine is how to do that with 4 different wines. So we're looking at 4 different things. Off-dry wine that's white, dry white with oak, something like Pinot Noir with low tannin, something with high tannin like Cabernet Sauvignon, so that people can.
I think that would be
the big stuff.
A brilliant, we've decided with the reopening of our store and doing wine tastings moving forward potentially in November, we had talked about continuing this model for future, and maybe that would be a brilliant idea for December.
I would love to do that.
For a monthly virtual wine tasting, because it's an education that has such value and can help.
And interest. People are so interested in it. It's fascinating. And you're very articulate about, how you go about it as well. So,
maybe
let's move on to
Italy. Do you want to talk about New Zealand before we ask the question before we move away from New Zealand? Maybe.
Yeah, can we ask the question about New Zealand before we move to Australia?
There's a good question. Is there stress upon vineyards by other agricultural activities such as crop farming and livestock farming? I've heard New Zealand is prime growing land.
So it is true that there are more sheep in New Zealand than people. So the biggest, really the biggest problem in viticulture in New Zealand is labor. It's not so much other crops, because they have not even come close to maxing out their potential in vineyard space. It's having anybody to work the land. So that's also why they're one of the leaders in vineyard management technology without people. How can I do with a tractor or some variation of a mechanism that used to be done by hand? Now, in the case of the wine we just tasted, that's a hand project, but they also don't have a lot of land, right? When you start thinking about the Sauvignon Blanc ocean that comes from Marlborough, almost all of that land is mechanized, and that's not a bad thing. It's a thing. It's an essential thing there because there's no labor to import. They're a long way from anywhere, and so that's really the biggest stress there is the stress of, well, I could plant all these vines, but will I have anybody to work them? Otago, the biggest stress isn't really about other crops or city invasion like in some places. It's really the stress of, did I pick the right spot? Will my grapes even get ripe here? Thank you.
Cool. Question. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I think workforce is definitely, from a farming standpoint, something around the globe that is an issue. So that's fascinating.
So it's interesting. I mean, we were in New Zealand, and now we're going to Australia, which seems like not that far for us in the United States. But like you said, it's, wine is not a country.
Right. So in order to get to Adelaide from New Zealand, you're talking about at least 6 hours on a plane. So you're either flying direct into Adelaide or you're making a connection. And so it's probably more like 8 hours of travel to get from New Zealand to Adelaide. But, so Adelaide is in South Australia. And if you imagine the country of Australia on the map, you'll see that there's the Big Bite. They call it that. It's like a giant shark, which is appropriate for their waters, came up and took a bite out of the continent. It has that little divot. So it's on the eastern side of that. And it is a protected harbor. It's been a grand city for a long time. And it was the founding city of South Australia where all of the immigrant population came in to make South Australia what it is today. Now, here's the important part. That's a maritime climate and it's low elevation. Right behind it are the hills you see in this picture. And I say hills instead of mountains because it's not like they're 10,000 feet tall, but they are, 500 meters, 450 meters, 600 meters. There are some parts of it, there's 700 meters. Those are not planted to vines. But interestingly, because of this cold air draft that comes in off of, because even the bay in front of Adelaide is still cool. It's not quite as cold as the giant Southern Ocean that it attaches to, but it's still cool air. And so imagine as the air warms over the city of Adelaide and the plains that it's enveloping, it has to go somewhere, right? It goes up. And when it goes up, it sucks the cold air in off the ocean to cool it down in the afternoon, and then that goes up into the highlands. So what's really fascinating to me is how much cooler it is in Adelaide, in Adelaide Hills than it is in Adelaide, and we're only talking about 15 miles, 20 miles, depending on what part of town you're in. On the same, well, let's look at it this way. January, which is prime ripening period for Australia. Remember, they're on the other side of the equator, so it's a different season. Summer is January. The average temperature in Adelaide is 83 high, 63 low. Sounds lovely, right? Let's move. The week I was there, it was 90 and 75, and it was almost harvest. So this is average, right? The same time, January, in Lenswood, which is one of the little villages up in Adelaide Hills, the average high is 77 degrees and 55 at night.
Huge difference, yeah. Big
difference.
The 55 really matters because you're putting your grapes into a point where they have to shut down. They have to protect themselves, and then they wake back up the next day. So it extends the growing period. It keeps you from getting to a point where you've overheated your Pinot Noir and given it undue flavor profiles of like roasted fruit or something like that. And it pushes your harvest further out and further out. The other interesting thing is that Adelaide as a city gets about 55 centimeters of rain a year on average. Adelaide Hills ranges from 90 to 130 centimeters of rain per year. So you can tell that as that water comes, that moist air comes in off the bay, it hits those hills and it gets squeezed a little bit and it rains. And so this is a very different thing.
It's like they aren't even related.
Yeah, like in McLarenville, it's like a classic Mediterranean, like Southern Rhone climate. And it's just like they touch each other, but it's low elevation. And so that's what we expect out of Australia is that warmer thing like McLarenville, but Adelaide Hills is completely different. And I had imagined it until I visited, And then I visited during harvest or right before harvest. That's where these pictures are all from my trip. And
Oh yeah.
I was like, it is so refreshing up here. It's so hot in Adelaide. It's so refreshing up here. And so that was the aha moment for me. So let's take that into the world of, it's not Australian wine.
Right.
Because McLaren Vale, within 5 miles of Adelaide Hills, is a completely different animal. There's no Pinot Noir planted. It's all Shiraz, Grenache, and Cabernet Sauvignon and sturdy red varieties primarily. But you climb that hill, and all of a sudden you have elegant Chardonnay, elegant Pinot Noir, Riesling, and a completely different style of Syrah. And geopolitically, globally, however, you could throw a rock between them, but they're completely different. So we need to stop saying things like Australian wine. We need to start doing the same thing we do for our own wines. We don't buy wine from California. We buy wine from Napa or Sonoma or Monterey or Sonoma Coast or whatever. It's the same thing there. So let's move on to the next one. Sean Smith. So we can get the questions. So Sean Smith is actually an offshoot of the same family that founded Yalumba, but in the process, Yalumba went to single family, meaning even of the cousins, just one cousin owned it. And one of the cousins went out and founded Sean Smith alongside of his good friend. Yeah. This is the 2018 vintage. And this picture is what I wanted you to understand from the last pictures. So the last picture was a beautiful day in Adelaide Hills, but with 130 centimeters of rain a year, they have this on a regular basis too. And that's not what we think of when we think of South Australia. We think sun and hot and Mediterranean, and Adelaide Hills is just not that. So this wine that we're about to taste primarily comes from one vineyard in Lenswood this year. They have 2 plots, but they only used most of one this time. It has 15 to 20% whole cluster, as we talked about last time. It's more apparent in this wine. When you taste this one, you're going to taste the whole cluster right off the bat. It's really like somebody dropped a fresh thyme stem in your glass. And comparative, the last wine had a pH of 3.6. This one has a pH of 3.8. What does that tell you? I don't know. I'm not a chemist. Here's what it tells you. It's less tart. It should be richer textured and darker fruit flavors. So let's find out.
But it's higher, it's colder, it's wetter. To me, it always seems like it's going to be more sterile, more not this juicy, ripe thing that's in front of me right now.
It's higher, colder, and wetter than McLaren Vale.
Wow.
And higher, colder, wetter than Adelaide and Barossa, but not higher and colder than Otago.
Right.
So everything's relative, right?
Yeah, gotcha.
All right, so
it's fascinating when you say how vastly different two things can be. You know, here we are talking about wines from south of the equator, and so you think that they'll be similar in regard because they are from a similar area, but they're not in any way. They're vastly different.
Yeah, the heat summation, which is how viticulturists decide. Basically, what it is, it's adding up the number of hours over the course of a growing season that the temperature is above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, because that's when the vine goes out of dormant and into active. So the average daily temperature has to be above, or the average daily temperature has to be above 50, and then you start counting hours. It's the Winkler system. And the growing degree days for the original plot that I showed you, that first plot for 2 paddocks, is just barely over 800. That's like 200 short of Burgundy. Cool.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, let's talk on some of the tech specs on this Sean Smith. I don't think we mentioned it for the last wine, but the 2 paddocks we have in the shop for $54. This we have priced in the shop for $37. So we do always like to mention that so that our customers know what the price point is of that. Currently, that's what the price is. So let's speak to some of the tech points on that Sean Smith. We're a bit over time, but definitely I feel like I could sit here all night.
I know, me too.
I'm like,
that's why
keep talking. So I don't want to
your compliment is well taken.
We did almost sell out of it, except for I think 1 bottle of each in the shop. So
yeah, we can always order more, but right now we only have 1 bottle each. If anybody's out there trying to come in for it.
Absolutely. So big difference here is ripeness of fruit. So the first one was really tart, a little racy, kind of Pinot Noir on a razor blade, so to speak. And this is more of a, where the last one was a 2-lane highway. This is more like a 2-lane highway with a divide in between. So you have,
See,
you have a
that's why we have to have you come back and
The
talk about.
analogies are amazing.
I know, it's like
the
Pinot Noir and a
connection.
razor blade.
Absolutely. The macro and micro comment regarding performance and is absolutely accurate. So
All right, right. Keep on.
keep going.
So you're talking about now the cherries moved to black cherry. The pomegranate that's in this wine is definitively pomegranate syrup kind of thing, like you flavor a drink with it, like pomegranate Izzy. If you,
Yeah.
if you're
Oh my God, I love those.
try an Izzy. And then it definitely has more of that caramel vanilla overtone from the oak aging. Cinnamon and clove is a little more pop to it here. It's almost like Christmas spices, right? And the herbal side starts, but then it goes into that rich fruit. And the texture here is like more satin than silk. And that's really the big difference here. And this is a personal like-dislike issue of like, which of these two wines is more texturally pleasing to me will be a lot of how you feel about which one you want to buy. I will tell you, my favorite is the Two Pinots. That's because I like that super elegant. Am I allowed to make these analogies anymore? I hope I'm not going to get crucified for this.
By who?
The first one for me is,
If they haven't crucified me, they're not going to crucify you. So
the first wine to me, from the way I think, is that elegant, straight-fitting black party dress with a string of pearls. That kind of wine. It's all there. It's packaged beautifully, but it's not showy, right? And this one is a more floral print dress. It's got more going on. It's a little easier to access. It's a little more friendly to you. And for that reason, some people are going to like this one more, and that's totally okay. These are
Carrie
both
Bradshaw.
versus Robert Palmer.
It's Carrie
and,
Bradshaw versus the
Yeah.
Robert Palmer girl.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
Well, I think that the nose is really important with Pinot Noir when it's a well-made Pinot Noir, when we talk about fruit. Regardless of what kind of fruit you smell and then you further taste, it's about the purity and really what is quite beautiful about well-made Pinot Noir is when you put your nose in it and it smells beautiful. It has a beautiful fruit smell. You may not be able to say what that fruit is that you're smelling or even maybe what you're tasting, but you know when it's beautiful. And the Two Pinots is beautiful, but it has just a little bit of a lift to it, a little bit of a lightness to it. And the Sean Smith is still equally as beautiful when you put your nose into it, but it just has that little bit more sensuality, just a little bit more of a voluptuousness to it.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you want to call that, the nose just tells you when you put your nose into both glasses, this is a incredibly beautiful wine. Just depends on which style you like more than the other.
Yeah. I mean, and they both have their benefits. I mean, it's not, like I said, it's Carrie Bradshaw versus the.
Yeah, they were vastly different.
Vastly different, but equally lovely. So,
Depends on your taste.
thank you for that, Ron. Great presentation. But we do have a couple of other questions. Ada is asking, just as a master som, what was the most unusual pairing that you've ever come across? And I think this is a good question too, because I'm sure, like you said, you've drank a ton of wines and probably had a ton of different pairings. What would you think? Well, let's go with what's your most unusual, and then what's your favorite?
Okay, so let's see. The one I was the most worried about was for an event I was doing, and I was working with a relatively famous chef, and his table was Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, and he sent me back a dish that was an agnolotti that was garnished with wasabi cream sauce.
That's always hard.
And I was like, okay. Sometimes the chefs just dial it in at a charity event and they're like, yeah, well, I don't really care what the wine is. I'm just doing my thing and you can just adjust. And sometimes they know something you don't know. So I sent him an email. He was a little brusque, which is not unusual for chefs. He was, it's not my first rodeo. But the answer was, just trust me. I've done this before. It's beautiful. And so I said, okay, because there wasn't really a lot of arguing I could do at that point. I mean, I'm begging for his time, and he's doing his thing. And so I came back to it, and I went to the table, and this beautiful, fairly lifted, aromatic style of Napa Valley Cab with this dish was gorgeous. The way he used the wasabi made it sing. I was absolutely in awe of the idea of it and wanted to repeat it. The other and the most difficult pairings I ever worked with, I had to do one ingredient at a time with someone I worked with for a very long time. We did an all Madeira dinner. We had champagne to start, and then we did Madeira for 5 courses, and it was a retrospective from 1834 to 1966. And to imagine doing, appetite.
Yeah, I know. Wow.
With Madeira,
Wow.
right? But we dialed it in, and the best pairing on that dish was main course with what was it? It was 1895 Malmsey, and it was with bone marrow, and it was magic.
That sounds really cool.
That's fascinating.
You run into stuff all the time. Like,
so I'm going to take you up on the offer. I think it was an offer to do another class with us, and because I want to know more about like everything you do. One of the questions I had was about tips for blind tastings and stuff like that, and I think that would be more appropriately answered at the next class. But if we can schedule you, get you on the calendar, we would love to have you back.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Fascinating. And so
the depth of knowledge and just the approach is vastly, I think, refreshing and interesting because we come at it from one perspective, but when we have that level of knowledge and approach it from that viewpoint, I think it really is amazing to help kind of just educate all of us in that.
Did you tell Ron that Francois Montand was on your lap there? That's Francois Montand.
So he doesn't have his.
That's his name, Ron. It's really his name.
He's got no eyes. But this is Francois Montand.
Well, that's a great one. When you get your second dog, you can name him Henri Champleau. Have you tried that one?
Oh gosh, he's enough trouble. I don't know that I'll be having another.
I have some Henri Champleau we can try. I have some Henri Champleau for the next dog. We'll bring a bottle next week.
That sounds awesome.
You absolutely have to. It's on I open it every Friday at 6 p.m.
Oh gosh,
hey,
we got one more great
question.
Yeah, so I'll read it. Considering your passion for service, how would you recommend the timeline of service from introduction, drinks and wines, to appetizer to dinner, and making sure you serve the rock star wine before palate fatigue?
Ah, yes.
So just a short question.
That was like whoa, such a good question.
And do the abbreviated version because maybe that may be a answer for the second class that we have with you.
I guess I'll just lean on my background and quote the master of the banquet at the wedding in Cana. The guests are all drunk and you save the best wine for last. What's going on?
Right.
Don't do that is the answer.
Yeah.
The other is if you're doing this at your home, then it's that fine balance between the number of bottles, because you want to be kind to your guests, right? You don't want to tell them, oh, I'm sorry, there's no more champagne, for instance. But there's also the rhythm of I'm leading up to something. And so lead your guests to where you want them to go, get them to the pinnacle, and then let them slide down on their own. And if the pinnacle needs to be main course, then serve fewer courses so that by the time they get to main course, they're still ready for that special wine that you offered. Like some friends.
That's smart. That's great.
Had a really great 2000 Bordeaux they wanted to share. And I was really grateful because I don't have a 2000 Bordeaux. And they asked what we should do, and I said, go simple, let the wine speak. And so we just did simple beef and did one course before it, and we just concentrated on that one wine so that it got to show itself the way it should. How's that for you?
Nice. Well, Ron, I don't know where to begin to thank you for your time tonight. We can't wait for the next time that we speak with you. But thank you so much for joining us here in Pensacola, Florida. As always, thank you, Francois, for that neck kiss. Fix, as always, thank you. For creating this.
We're gonna talk about the wines that we're doing next week.
I know, I'm so excited. I'm like, we're over time, and
I know we are.
Ron, thank you again.
Ron, you're awesome. We'll see you again soon. I'm pretty sure, hopefully next month, if you've got the time, because I certainly want to pick your brain a little more, and I have questions that didn't get answered because we just ran out of time because it was just too much great information.
There's
and
just so much awesomeness.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Fix. That was pretty cool, right?
Stellar. An hour wasn't enough.
No, an hour was enough. It was fantastic. So,
without further ado, next week, Quinta de la Rosa
this Portugal wine, we're doing a still red. That
It's there somewhere.
right here. So it's a still red from. So a lot of people they think of Portugal and they think of port, which most people do. But they do a lot of great still reds, and so this is a Dura red that is. Francois coming down to bother you?
I don't know. I'm not in the same room as you are. You know the magic of television.
Right. So this is, and what's the price on this? 16.
Yeah, it's not very much. I mean, I think like we said, a lot of people are familiar with ports. They want to, certainly with the holidays approaching, and we are featuring a port wine. They're familiar with the fortified wines, but the still wines of Portugal, especially from the Douro area where this wine is from, they are magnificent, and they are great for anybody who likes sort of, medium to full-bodied wines like Cabernet or Merlot or Tempranillo. There's actually some Tempranillo in some of these wines. It's just under the Portuguese pseudonym as well. But anyway, and Quinta de la Rosa is a very old-school producer. We're going to have Philip Bergquist, who is actually the owner of the winery, on with us next week.
Nice. Very cool.
He's been the winery since I believe 1901.
That's crazy.
When his great grandmother was bequeathed, or not bequeathed, excuse me, given that vineyard or that winery as a dowry for her wedding.
A dowry. Wow.
Yes.
Right.
It's a term that we don't hear very often anymore, except if you're reading maybe Charles Dickens or something. But Philip has been to Pensacola, and actually we actually brought port to a lot of people here when we were here about, it feels like 3 or 4 years ago, but I think it was only 18 months ago.
Lord.
But the Portuguese reds that they make, the still reds are, I think, some of the best red wines in the world. And actually, and Philip will probably talk a little bit more about this, they do very ultra traditional methods where it's all estate grown. They have people trotting the grapes with their feet, which is really cool for some of their ports. I know that sounds a little weird to some people, but that's the way they've been doing it.
That's how all wine is made.
Well, that's the way they did it in Portugal for hundreds of years, and it's extremely expensive to do it because you literally have to bring in dozens of people to do it.
Yeah, right.
And they actually have machines that have the fake feet that come down like you're
I love those.
watching a cartoon, but they actually have these fake feet machines, and these guys don't do it. They actually move real people, which is really, really cool. So I hope everybody will come by and pick it up. The 10-year-old Tawny Port.
Yes.
So that was only 16. This one's a little more.
30.
It's 30. So, but it's a port, and
a 10-year.
It's a 10-year tawny. Which tawny? I chose this one because, I chose both of them. But it was because I wanted to show that Portugal does some wonderful still wines, and then I wanted to do my favorite of the ports, and I love the tawny ports. I love that nutty kind of taste to it, and so this is a 10-year tawny, which is affordable still. As you get into the 30s, 40s, they're much more higher. But even at 30, I mean, this is going to be something that we're coming up on the holidays, and I feel like it's going to be something that people would enjoy, and it's a sipper. It's not, you're not going to drink the whole bottle. It's something that's going to last. And
to me,
I have with some people before. Me and 2 or 3 other people have took down a bottle, and the next day is not that easy. Let's just be honest.
I can be honest about our Riesling class. The next day,
but to talk about that a little bit. Yeah, I mean, port is going to cost you a little bit more, but these guys actually everything is done on the estate, and then they're not shipping it down to be in Porto, the city. It's and waiting to be bottled and being bottled by somebody else. They do everything there. So they're doing everything themselves, and sometimes you're getting more for your money when you get somebody who's doing everything on the estate. We all know that, and this is what those guys do. And you're gonna have 2 or 3 glasses after a nice big meal, and you're gonna be, or little glasses or big glasses. You're gonna feel pretty good. I think you're gonna feel really.
We're excited about it. Next week will be fun.
Next week will be fun. Come in, grab your wines. Hopefully, we won't have any hurricanes to worry about. So we'll see how that goes. But let's go ahead and get him out. And we're gonna say bye.
Bye. Bye,
That
Fix.
was quick. Bye, Fix. So for the last of us, we're saying good night to as well. Please come in, grab some of these. We will say 2 things that I want to remind everybody. We do have the virtual wine boxes still available. Jessica's actually working on the 3rd.
Promo case number 3 will come out on Monday in our newsletter. So I'm going to send out all that information. As always, I'm probably going to go ahead and create a little flyer so you can see what 1 and 2 were as well.
Right.
Same kind of.
So what that means is that
the first 6 weeks, 6 to 12, and the remaining.
So all the wines that we've done for the virtual wine tastings, you can buy in the store at a discount in a case.
Yeah.
And leave her alone.
15% discount.
And then you can go back, and if you missed some of the broadcast, we either have them on Facebook as broadcast, or you can also go to our YouTube channel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to go back and revisit and get some education and some fun.
Oh my God, so much education tonight.
Tonight was
we got to close it out because we are almost an hour and a half.
All right, bye.
See you
Have a
guys
great
next
week.
week.